Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to the Power of Our Stories Coffee and Conversation Thursday night group. Through storytelling, a strong community of protectors has been built. A choice was made to not suffer in silence any longer and join others that get it in a judgment-free zone. We want to give you hope and a place to thrive. You are needed here to help us build. So tonight, I want to introduce you to our storyteller for the evening. It's a combat engineer, Army officer veteran, Dan Joseph. Dan published a book on mental health after leaving the Army in 2022. He had a soldier in his platoon who survived his suicide attempt, and this inspired him to write a book to educate incoming leaders on the importance of proactively strengthening mental health and resilience. So Dan, it's really a pleasure to have you here. I think what I've mentioned before is I really appreciate your true passion to support and help people thrive versus the alternative. So Dan, welcome, and we'd love to hear your story.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all you giving me a voice and allowing me to be here. It's super inspiring. This is definitely a real serendipitous turn of events in my life, just because of folks like you who are willing to support and give a voice to the voiceless. A lot of the service members who are quietly struggling and keeping it professional on the surface to abide by a certain standard, which is honorable and understandable, but it comes with a price. And so, yeah, I'm happy to share about kind of my journey. I don't know if you have specific questions at this point, or did you want me to just kind of give the background on, why I wrote the book and what I'm doing here?
Yeah, we'd love to have the background, just hear a little bit about your background too, and then what got you so passionate about this arena, and then we'll have a question answer afterward.
Yeah, well, I'll start with the main premise of the book and what really caused it to kind of coalesce and come to fruition. Cody was my soldier. He survived after multiple struggles with mental health over a period of time. He let me know that he survived a suicide attempt. It was my last week as platoon leader, and that completely changed my life. I called his mother, spoke with her on the phone, let her know that Cody was alive and we were going to get him help, which we did. I was familiar with his struggle and some of the messaging that he got from others that precipitated the event. And that really impacted my perspective and the depth with which I approached leadership from then on out. And my other friend, Austin, he was an enlisted Marine. He's now an Army officer. And he let me know that at the time of publication, when I was creating this book, he wrote the foreword to the book. But Austin lost 12 brothers in arms from his unit to suicide after Afghanistan. Upon publishing my book, he notified me that the 13th guy took his life. And so it's unfathomable to me to understand. I can never understand double digits with something like that, let alone, just a single life is devastating enough. And this is something that I realized was normalized by my peers. And there's a weightiness to that that's hard to describe. There's a lot that goes on in the military community that does not make it out to the public's eye, and you can understand why. Just because there's a lot that we keep to ourselves for OPSEC, for operational security. And so the question was how to have a discussion about this, a very explicit discussion about this, a transparent discussion about this, while also respecting the military culture. It's a very fine line to walk. So I wrestled with this quite a bit when I got out of the Army, wondering what I could have done better as a leader, what I should have done, and perhaps shining a light on the good things I did do. I was just struggling to know, what was going on when I got out, and I was struggling a lot more than I thought I would. I saw my soldiers as my kids, as my brothers. Being an officer, there's a certain distance you have with enlisted personnel, but I really closed that gap quite a bit. I was very, very close to my privates. I was close to, everybody in my platoon because I knew what the lockdowns were doing for mental health, in the community around the world, really. I was obtaining my master's in organizational psychology while I was in uniform. So that was giving me an academic and scientific understanding of what was going on while I was living it out in the field with the troops. And so I was keeping an eye on their physiology, their eye contact, their rate of burnout, their disenfranchisement with certain people. I noticed some bullying in the ranks. I noticed some people using rank to take advantage of others. I also saw some incredibly humble and accessible and approachable men and women who were exemplifying amazing leadership. So I started studying everything around me, and the number one thing I cared about was not losing a soldier. I wasn't combat deployed. I've never been combat deployed. I was part of a non-deployable unit. We were training folks to deploy, but a lot of my peers were combat vets, and I've, through my own growth, through therapy and recovery from things that I struggled with as a child, or I guess from childhood, some trauma that happened earlier in life. I learned an extensive vocabulary about human psychology, about mental health, and having some discussions with some of the troops that are combat veterans. They started telling me, "Hey, you're starting to describe feelings I've had since Iraq, since Afghanistan, that I've never told anybody. I've never told my wife, never told a therapist." They started telling me about moral injuries that they suffered, things that they've witnessed, things that they've done, that they don't feel safe talking to a clinician about, that they don't want the chain of command to find out about, and but they felt compelled to share with me what was going on. And it was a huge honor to hear that. It was a huge weight to hear that. And I was just kind of alarmed that these guys were going around carrying an invisible weight that us leaders had no idea that they were carrying. I know a double digit amount of people, probably more than 20 that I worked very closely with who were struggling with suicidality, or who had recently struggled with suicidality. And again, that became normalized. It wasn't that I was desensitized to it. It was more that I had sort of a fatalistic mindset growing. I talked to my troops about what I could do to help make their lives better. And they, the guys that were in for more than 10 years chuckled and said, "Hey, sir, when enough of us basically take ourselves out, then we'll get a look. Then the Pentagon will look into it. But until then, nobody cares. Nobody cares about our rank. Nobody cares about us." And I was very, very explicit about my concern for them. I let them know that they mattered to me, and I couldn't care less about what rank they were. I was going to listen to them and hear them out. It was definitely an uphill battle, and I understand why. I mean, we don't want people to play the victim. It's kind of the stigma, right? They want people to be tough and be strong in the military, but at the same time, the amount of maintenance we put into our equipment, to our vehicles, to our weapons, why don't we put that amount of maintenance into the mindset of these men and women that we're leading was what was driving me. It's like we cared more about the vehicles than we did about the troops, and that was mind-blowing to me. So I wrote a journal prompt when I got out of the Army about Cody, about suicide, about depression, and what I saw in the ranks. And then it expanded from a journal prompt to just process cathartically what was going on inside of my heart to a 400-page book. And I wrote it in like 3 weeks. It just poured out. The editing took 6 months, but I started sharing it with the people I wrote about who impacted me. So there's some men and women they're characters in the book. Some of them, it's their real name. Some of them I had to change it for OPSEC, but because they're still operators and stuff. But I let them know that they really impacted me and shaped me and my perspective on what healthy leadership looks like. So I was really trying to highlight and emphasize the good stuff, because anybody who's in the military understands what happens when you focus on the negative and when it becomes an echo chamber where we just spiral into bad stuff. And so I was like telling myself to focus on the good stuff, highlight the good leaders, highlight the positive. So I did. And yeah, it really impacted them. I was receiving texts from my friends that they were tearing up and crying at what I wrote. So I knew it wasn't just me that was getting emotional. It was, it carried over and it translated. So I ran it by the Pentagon. The manuscript was officially approved by the DoD Security Publication Review Board. So that's nice. It's a good little certification to add into the book. So the active duty community understands that I'm in no way trying to be disparaging. And I don't mention any units. I don't mention anybody by name aside from my friends. But I try to be as respectful as possible and as objective as possible as well. But I do want to create some guidelines for newcomers coming into the military to understand, especially if you're going to lead a group of combat veterans, the amount of stress that they're dealing with that they may not even self-disclose. They may not even be aware of it, but subconsciously they're carrying it. So yeah, that's kind of my rant as to why I wrote the book. And if you want to know more, I'm pretty open about what happened to me as a child. I talk about in the book some stuff that I went through that really didn't come out until later in life when I sobered up from the alcohol, stepped away from the drugs and stuff, and started doing jujitsu. I became grounded in my body and had to stop dissociating in order to grow in martial arts, in jujitsu and MMA and Muay Thai and all this stuff I was doing. But it caused a lot of stuff to come out physiologically in my body, a lot of trapped memories. And if any of you have read The Body Keeps the Score, that was basically my life for a while. So yeah, I grew quite a bit through that. And I applied that knowledge in the book. And that's what really allowed me to connect with war veterans, was the physiological awareness that I had of my body and how it completely mirrored what they were going through. So I'll stop rambling at this point if you have questions.
That's it. Thank you, Dan. That was a really great and thoughtful share. Tell us again, what is the name of the book?
The book is called Backpack to Rucksack.
Backpack to Rucksack.
And the subtitle is Insight into Leadership and Resilience by Military Experts. So I am not a military expert in the book. The role that I play is sort of a curator of knowledge that these other service members have given me. A lot of them I've met before I joined. And it ranges from Navy SEALs, Green Berets, MARSOC officers, to fighter jet pilots, helo pilots, EODs, rescue swimmers, just a variety of folks that I've been blessed to meet in my life who helped me sober up and choose a better path. And they inspired me to join. So I joined the military at 32 years old, which is super old, but it was a non-issue for me at all. I was welcome. I was part of the group, and it was a sense of belonging that I needed my whole life. So it was really cool.
That's great. I really appreciate you sharing. I'm curious too. You said that you had childhood trauma.
Yeah.
What could, because we hear that all the time, that childhood trauma, and then you go to the military, trauma happens there, it goes to the same part of the brain, and then yeah, with everything undealt with from childhood. Do you want to share a little bit more about that? Is that open to discussion, or okay?
Yeah, absolutely. And is there music in the background now? Because I can move to a quieter spot.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah.
She's got a great voice. Yeah, so basically, and I put this in the book, the military actually attracts people with some of the highest ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, in the nation. And so if you look at the group, the average of ACEs is much, much higher for those who join the military. And anyway, so yeah, I fit that criteria. And actually, when I was writing the book, I was then aware of some other things that happened to me in life that I completely had forgot about. It didn't happen until I came across an article, and yeah, it just suddenly came to memory. So that was pretty rough. But physical abuse was a big part of my childhood upbringing. I was physically abused, and that was what came out in jiu-jitsu. I was suffering a significant freeze response. So as a child, because of the adult and the situation and where I was developmentally in my brain development at that stage of my life. I wasn't able to fight off the, you know, the abuser. So what happened was my motor responses were shut down basically my whole life when it comes to offensively protecting myself. So I could defensively respond, which is basically, freeze and dissociate. So I dissociated at the time of the abuse. And that sense of dissociation carried from childhood through the age of 25. When I was 17, I discovered alcohol in college and just started partying away to self-medicate everything I felt, simply just to quiet down the nervous system, the amygdala, the fight-flight response, the hypervigilance, ruminations. It was 24/7. I didn't know that because that was my norm. And so self-medication was extremely scheduled for me. It was consistent, I should say. It was a very consistent thing. And yeah, that was not until jiu-jitsu was I suddenly made aware of my freeze response. And my coach saw it. I couldn't execute the moves, and my body just completely shut down, and I had no words. It was a wordless situation. So I couldn't describe what was going on. It was very phenomenological. It was experiential. It was just in my body systemically. I was feeling it. And then I think can you hear me right now? I think okay, my headphones are about to die. So essentially what happened is I was just experiencing this stuff without being able to speak it out. And I started having panic attacks, anxiety attacks. I felt like I was being chased by a hunter. It was it was just revving so hard neurologically. But then I saw a therapist because a friend of mine, he's an awesome guy. He's a DEA agent, cool dude that I looked up to. He broke the stigma of males seeing psychologists. He told me that he has a therapist. I helped him with his marriage. And he was the first male in my life to okay me seeing a therapist. And then ever since that day, mental health became a priority for me. And the shame was removed out of it. And because of that, there's actually a period in my life where I didn't want to be alive. So that was a personal experience that I had after the panic and the anxiety started ramping up because of what was going on in my body. I wanted to just stop it. So I thought, well, if I didn't wake up tomorrow, then technically it stopped, right? That's the solution. And so in the Army, we tell our soldiers suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And it became very and important for me to put the message out there that when people do want to take their lives, it's because there's a sense of, sorry, I think at this point, did I lose you guys?
No, we can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. So I jumped from one headphone to the other, but essentially there's a sense of timelessness when people want to end their lives. There's a sense of, this is forever. I'm stuck in this. That's how I felt. I felt trapped in my body and trapped in a memory that was hard to verbalize. So I couldn't even explain to myself what was happening because I chose, since a child, I didn't want to self-disclose what was going on. But all this stuff, and I had no idea until I was sitting at a table with these war veterans kind of talking about this stuff. I had no idea that they felt the same way. You know what I mean? So when they told me, hey, you're describing our lives, our private, very private lives. Wow, it just kind of blew the doors off this whole discussion. And that's, so out of that bad stuff, something good came out of it, which is redemptive and kind of makes it worth it. As weird as it is to say, I would never think that I would ever say that because there's no justification for abuse, but at the same time, because of these veterans, these guys that I look up to, they brought a lot of love and perspective into something that, I was afraid of my whole life. I was trying to medicate my whole life. So it's a really cool full circle moment. So I suppose I wrote this book as a way of gratitude, showing gratitude to them, to allowing me to heal. So it's not just me trying to heal them, it's them reaching out and validating what I went through, and I would have just never expected that connection. It's so cool.
You share so deeply, and I can just see how much you're going to help people because you share so deeply and so thoroughly and really describe your process, which not many people are able to do so well. So I just want to thank you first off for that. I want to ask you something. Can you share what disassociating is?
Yeah, so essentially it's leaving the body. It's, when abuse or trauma happens to the body that is overwhelming, when you cannot escape it physically, the mind will escape it by creating distance. It's sort of a boundary creating mechanism. It's a defensive mechanism that allows the mind to split the situation from what's being recorded in the mind, if you will. Now, it is stored in the body. There is going to be a scar that happens psychologically, and physiologically, it will be embedded in the body. That's why the body keeps the score, is such an accurate, such an apt term. But dissociation is the mind's way of trying to create some sort of barrier, some sort of distance, is the simplest way of putting it. And it's experienced as floating out of the body while the abuse or the trauma is happening. It's sort of this ethereal kind of almost like levity. It brings levity to a heavy situation where it's a form of escape, and it's a survival mechanism too. It's not anyone's fault. It's not weakness. It's not somebody planning to bury something. It's just simply a biological built-in mechanism that says, hey, I can't handle this right now. There's no way to handle this with full cognition. So let me close the aperture and try to record the least amount of data as possible about this traumatizing event. But subconsciously, there's a lot that is stored from that event.
So it's protecting you at the time, but it doesn't serve you later on in safe situations, especially with building relationships with people and that sort of thing. So it's a tricky thing to be. So just being aware of that is a real gift, isn't it? So you can know what's happening, and I think that's just really powerful. And it's interesting too that a lot of our protectors and warriors are into jiu-jitsu, so there must be something pretty powerful about that practice.
It's cool because it's not that violent. For martial art, it can get violent. You can escalate the violence if you'd like to. There are coaches who will take it to like a combat level, like hand-to-hand striking, but in practice, it's a very gentle art. It's like chess. It's very cerebral, and ideally, you're with other emotionally intelligent beings, people who are able to regulate it, to make sure everyone's safe and everyone's respectful. That's the healthiest performance of jiu-jitsu. There are people who come in with different intentions, but from what I experienced, especially with the trauma that I experienced growing up, it was the least. I was the least afraid of jiu-jitsu, and I just remembered how terrified I was ever feeling victimized again. And yet, jiu-jitsu allowed me to build a brotherhood and a tribe in which I was able to open up with trust, and give them access to those parts of me that were just, I was terrified of ever letting anybody get close to me in that way, or put my life in someone's hands. And in jiu-jitsu, you're choking people out. You're hoping that if you do pass out, they'll resuscitate you. I mean, it's an intimate bond. It really is intimate, and there's a warrior spirit to it. So it's really cool. It's very healing, but it's important to understand levels of activation and emotional flooding that can occur based on the traumas in someone's life. And it's a form of exposure therapy for a lot of people. And with any form of exposure therapy, it's very important to personalize it and respect people's limits. And there have been times I had to walk off the mats. There are times I've had to stop people from engaging with me. There are times where I had to tell someone, if you do that again, it's going to be a fight. You need to stop doing that. And so it gave me words. It gave me the ability to speak my boundaries as well. So I never was able to do that. So as a child, I was taught I didn't have boundaries. So because of the martial arts and jiu-jitsu and a lot of these brothers and that I have on the mats, I was able to learn finally how to protect myself with my words and with my defensive and offensive capabilities as well. But it all ties to mental health and a willingness to reassociate with the body and have some grounding techniques to control the nervous system.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I am so grateful that you've had all these experiences and this kind of support, and that all the the hard times are being replaced with beauty, and
Yeah.
being a healer in this world, it's really cool to see, Dan, and I'm happy for you. I'm proud of you. I'm grateful for you.
Thank you.
I do want to open it up now to the group for any questions and comments. Oh, there we go. We've got Chappie.
Hey, came in late. I had to work. Big surprise. Dan, hello. I missed your story. Todd
Sorry, it's
Stewart,
recorded.
injury retired firefighter, PTSI survivor, barely. Now I'm a chaplain and a trauma resiliency peer coach with 22-0. Actually, a comment about dissociation can also be used to heal. As a matter of fact, the core of 22-0's trauma resiliency protocol is modeled on a therapy called visual kinesthetic disassociation. And it's part of the, during the process of, we have the person that we're treating bracket the traumatic experience with 2 safe experiences, and they make a movie out of it, and then they dissociate and they watch themselves watching this movie. And so dissociation is a defense mechanism, as you said, Dan, but it could also be used during the healing process. It's an integral part of the trauma resiliency protocol. So I just thought it was very interesting to hear you speak about that in terms of, the response to the traumatic event in contrast to dissociation being used as part of the process of healing from those traumatic events. Childhood trauma, it's big for everybody. It's the same thing with first responders. We firefighters, police officers, a lot of what drives us to be protectors is because we had no one to protect us when we were young from those traumatic experiences. Same thing with the military, I think. So man, I'm gonna have to go back and listen to the recording because I know I missed a good story. So thank you, Dan.
Yep, thank you.
You'll love it. And I did introduce him to Tammy. So he's familiar with the 22-0. Thank you, Chappie. Sarah Marie.
Hey, Dan. Thank you for sharing your story. And I'm going to have to look for that book. I find it very interesting. Giving a quick synopsis of like who I am and what I do and everything. So I recently kind of went back to the hospital and I'm working in the ER now. And it's been a interesting awakening. So I left hospital nursing in 2009 and going back, and I never worked in the ER. And so being in the ER and kind of seeing and hearing people that have trauma that don't even know they have trauma. A lot of them are like younger nurses, late 20s and 30s, and just the jaded hardening of their hearts to get through the day-to-day that they have to do. And so it's been an interesting experience for me, and more processing my own healing, because it's that feeling like that pull to kind of slip back into old patterns to deal with the stress. And then I realize I know better than that. I've been through this stuff. I know better than that. So I'm really interested to see your book and get my hands on it and get some leadership tips on that. And then the other thing I wanted to validate is I also have childhood trauma and was also a survivor of domestic violence. And so my heart has been set on teaching self-defense to other victims and survivors of domestic violence. And one of the quotes that I have in like my little workbook that I've put together is from Bessel van der Kolk, and it's the best way to overcome ingrained patterns of submission is to restore a physical capacity to engage and defend. And so I trained Taekwondo. I got my black belt in Taekwondo. And that was like the very first step of my healing process. I left that abusive marriage in 2016, got temporary full custody of my kids, found a Taekwondo center like at a YMCA event and was like, we're signing up for that. And then became immersed in a culture where men were respectful and they didn't disrespect you, and they treated you with respect, and they uplifted you and were there for you. And then also to engage in some of the more physical, like we used a different self-defense program because Taekwondo is not very hands-on. It's a kicking martial art. But we had a more real world applicable self-defense program that we used too. And so that was really fundamental in my healing and recovery from that abuse. So I want to find and get a hold of people to actually do a study on it and show just how martial arts can really help people overcome those abusive situations, because I absolutely agree with you. And I think if we could have some concrete data on it, that would just help the cause.
Hey, if you look at my website, combatpsych.com, I did a grad school study on jiu-jitsu and anxiety management. It's a comparative study between 32 black belts and 32 non-jiu-jitsu practitioners on anxiety, like self-appraisal, pre, during, and after a high stress event. So it's not like I didn't get it approved for publication because I didn't work with a professor on it. It was sort of my own personal project, but I developed a poster on it. And anyway, that's really cool that you healed similarly to me. So I'm stoked that you found such a cool community, and what a story you have to share. That's cool. Sorry you went through that, but it's awesome what example you are as a mother to your children, you know?
Yeah, thank you. No, I'll definitely check that out. And I think you should push for publication of that and find a way to do it and maybe expand on that study, because I think the more and more, of the mental health community that we can get behind that as well, to help. I mean, it's a non-pharmacological intervention for healing.
Right.
We have so many people that are having issues with medications and the side effects, and there's no side effect to training martial arts other than getting bruised up sometimes.
Yeah, bruised up, blisters, things like that,
Yeah. Easier to heal from.
Yeah, there are a couple studies on it, but it's something that should be growing for sure. Yeah, thanks again.
That's powerful. Thank you, Sarah Marie. Great comment. I'm going to find that website. I'll post that too in the chat while Janet is sharing. Janet.
Yeah, a disassociation. I had no idea that I disassociated. I was after a dark night, was finally sought help and worked with a psychologist and diagnosed with PTSD to do with my job. I thought everything was due to a car accident I'd been in. But that was in 2003, before they were even talking about dispatchers getting it. But I'll take you back. I was a spouse first, and spouses get vicarious trauma. And I had health issues for many, 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 many years. And I can pretty much trace it back now, looking back, that it was in my body long before the diagnosis ever came. But two things that I took, I did my master NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, timeline therapy and hypnotherapy. And it was during that, when I was doing my training, that I realized what I was doing at work. When I took an emergency call, I totally disassociated. I wouldn't have been able to do with it. And I think that a lot of, not just military, but all of us who have to deal with the trauma stuff, we would break down. Like, you can't cry with a child who needs help. You have to sort of take that out. But I also realized that I didn't know I was doing. I stopped breathing when I took a call. I would hold my breath because I thought I could hear them better if I didn't breathe. And so I'm so glad that you've done that. And I looked up the book. I haven't got it yet. I just looked at on your thing today. But we really need to get this out, and even to doctors and that. And just a quick thing, I had to see a cardiologist and do a bunch of tests and that. Anyways, he wants me to lose 50 pounds. Sent me to a weight loss guy. Find out this guy just wants to give me pills. He's a pharmacist. And I said, like, you guys aren't looking at the big picture. So I just talked to a dietitian, and I said, look, this is my thing. There's trauma in the body, there's injury in the body, there's all of this other stuff that nobody's looking at. Cardiologist says, go lose 50 pounds. But you're not looking at the bigger picture. And so this dietitian was amazing. She said, come see me. We're going to go through everything. I'm going to give you a bunch of blood work that you need to go and get done. You take it to your doctor and stuff. Like, we really need a holistic approach to all of this. It's not just one thing that's happening in our body. So keep doing what you're doing. We really need to keep this going. And, you know, power of our story is part of it, because we're coming together to do so much. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet, for that. Rich.
Dan, you mentioned DEA. Back in 1986, DEA decided to form a trauma institute, and each division had to name a person to attend the first meeting, and it was a peer selection process. I was designated for my division to go to the meeting. We went to Philadelphia, and it was to lay out the ground rules of what this program was going to be all about. But one of the things that surprised the clinicians was when the topic came up about if you're involved in a shooting or whatever trauma it is within DEA, how do we treat that? What do you do with the person? Do you say you have to go to see a clinician, you know, before you can report back to duty or whatever? And unanimously, we told them that it should be a requirement. They didn't think we were going to go that way. And I said, the reason being is, if you tell me to go, and then I go, other people are going to look at me, something's wrong with Rich, you know. But if you say it's mandatory, that stigma's gone. You know, I fall back is, hey, if I don't go, I don't have a job, you know, so.
Yeah, so true. Thanks, Rich. That's a good point. Michael.
Yeah, everybody's got so much good points here, but I just want to say I love your vulnerability. Wow, it's been a long day. I can't talk. But love your vulnerability, Dan. There we go. I don't know why that was so hard to say. But you brought up so much good stuff in there. One of the things, dadgummit, now that it's my turn to speak, I forget what I was going to say. Give me a second. Hold on. Let me let the brain catch up. I had it right up until you called my name.
Do a crayon, it'll come back to you, buddy.
Crap. There was something, not that. No. I literally had it right
in your mind.
I'm trying to, but it gets further away.
Secondhand trauma is a real thing. Could it be that?
I mean, that was something else too. Yeah, like, you know, like we tell people, that was a different topic. That wasn't the first point that I had, but that was another point, is that, you know, you can pass on your trauma. Like we tell people that suicide doesn't end the pain, it just passes it on. Well, so does not addressing your trauma. You end up passing it on and hurting other people. So, you know, you think you're being tough and sucking it up, but you're actually just hurting everyone around you. Which I would say in turn, if they're hurting, that's going to hurt you more too. So definitely does you no good. Was it around childhood trauma? No, it was. It'll probably come back to me later. It was a really good point too, and I forgot, but we'll just stick with that.
Right after Paul, come back on. You'll remember. Hey, Paul.
Dan, first, thank you for your presentation this evening. Much more importantly, I hope that you will be able to come back and visit us often, because you have generated some interesting and thoughtful response. And I think that's really an important component of all of this. And so I would appreciate seeing you, and I'm sure there are others too, but I just wanted to share that with you. Thank you.
Yeah. That Holly, is that your
Thank
hand?
you.
Oh, you're muted.
I'm sorry, my little emoji thing just keeps disappearing. I click it on, it goes away. But anyway, I wanted to say something that's already been said a couple of times. Thank you so much for your vulnerability and your relatability. As a mother of one who did not come home, but I believe that if he had, he may have suffered as so many have that, did not stay, left their hearts, left their broken spirits on the battlefield, and ended up dying here. My son didn't die here, he died there, but there's really no difference. The combat damages the heart and the soul. And so I just want you to know how much I appreciate all the things you guys have said. There's so many, I'm just so honored to be a part of this, be able to be a part of this group and hear these stories. Thank you, Dan, and I can't wait to read your book.
Thank you.
It is a powerful thing, Dan, that you are really breathing life into other people. Like when you think about it, that kind of wisdom that you've gotten through the heart to care, it really is a standout. It's a light. And, I thank you for that. It's a beautiful, powerful thing that anybody on like the Power of Our Story is all about. So, Scott.
Sir, I see Mike's got his hand back up, so I'm going to pass it back to a fellow Marine there, and then I'll go after him.
See, just servant leadership. Isn't that beautiful?
He's like, if I don't let Mike go first, he'll forget his point again. I told you, come back to me. So I was gonna say, when you were talking about like your struggle and how you were close to suicide, and you were explaining that darkness and that feeling there. I just want to say I love the way you explain that, because like I would try to explain that to people, and my way's a little different, but the way you said it was like so perfect, that feeling like it's never gonna end. I always say, you just get tired of being in that place. But the way you said, like, you just feel like it's never going to end. So it does feel like an out to take your own life. So I like that. And the other thing I was going to say is, I just found it interesting because like I related so much to your story, right? Like, and I'm sure a lot of us do and have similar stories. But it's interesting to see that perspective, because like for you had that freeze, right? For me, it was fight. Like, I don't ask questions, I just want to fight. But realizing too, like that just proves that, everybody's response is different to things, which is why, just go back to big pharma thing, right? Like shoving pills at people and having one solution is not the solution, because the answer varies from person to person, just as the trauma and the response to it varies from person to person. I'll get off my soapbox now. That's all I got. Back to you, Scott.
That was a really good point though, Michael, that when Dan and I had talked before, I thought that too, that we've never really talked about that moment in time where if you're in that ideation, that time where you really are wanting to take your life, whatever that moment is, that it shifts you over to a timelessness. Is that where you just think it'll be forever? Like you lose the insight of time, maybe? Is that a way to talk about it? That you lose that insight of time, that you are not going to be in that space forever, but maybe you get lost in that. And that is something to talk about and to make very known. I think that's really important, to really share with people that if you get into that time where you feel like you're lost, that you will be like that forever, that there's actually language for that, and that you won't be in that forever. So that's just something we talk about too. If there's any way to plant these seeds before people reach these crises, so they know what's going on.
Well,
You know?
I think on that, if I can say something on that real quick, it's, and this is a conversation I've had before, is sometimes like we start, like if you're stuck in your, it's what's it called, the region beta paradox, right? Like where people bounce back further or quicker from more extreme injuries than, small ones. Like if you roll your ankle, it could take years to heal versus you break your leg, you're back at it in 6 to 8 weeks. People, you get stuck in your comfort zone, right? And if stuff's happening and it never pushes you out of that comfort zone and you're still kind of hovering in there, even though you're at like the edge, you're still in your comfort zone. So you're not going to adjust things, but slowly that comfort zone keeps moving and things. So you're slowly descending to this dark place. And then all it takes is one thing, just one thing to go wrong. And now and oftentimes, for me, I didn't even realize it, right? Like I didn't realize I was that bad off until I, tried to take my life the first time. And then also too, you kind of get in that place. And if you're in that darkness for a really long time, yeah, it feels like you're never going to get out of it.
If I can just share one thing before I know Scott's still waiting for a while. So I just published this on the website, the Combat Psych website that I have. It's a blog about, I called it Why Suicide Makes Sense. And essentially what I studied like during my master's was the neurophysiology of suicidality. And essentially when you have, because there's like different depressive disorders, and when depression is prolonged for a certain amount of time, the brain will, on functional MRIs, they'll show that there's reduced blood flow to certain regions of the mind that allow us to have awareness of time, to understand the transience of time. So the anterior cingulate is one area, and there's the parietal lobe. There's like 6 or 7 different structures that collectively help us feel time, like have a sense of a second versus a minute versus an hour versus a day. And prior to suicidality, ratcheting up.
Oh, well, we lost him.
Just when at that crucial point.
Right? It's a
Cliffhanger.
cliffhanger. Always the cliffhanger. Oh my gosh.
Like when my mother said, I hid the gold bars, and then she died.
Oh no.
So good,
I would like to
Sara. Thank you so much.
That what really happens when we get to the edge of suicide is it's because we have lost all hope.
Yeah.
And when we've lost all hope, there is no longer a purpose. And as far as the timeline goes, I'm sure that feels like forever, although I have never experienced it myself. Dan's back. Let's let him speak.
Sorry, Dan, we were left at a cliffhanger.
You guys? Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, there we go.
Yes.
All right, may I continue my thought? I want to interrupt.
Please do.
So essentially, prior to suicidality happening, brain reduces blood flow to those structures, and they show that patients will start to experience a sense of timelessness. So what I wanted to say is, there's hardwired circuitry in our brain, neurophysiological structures in our mind that allow us to take the stigma and take the shame out of feelings, out of emotions, out of the confusion of what's going on, right? To allow someone to know, hey, you're a biological creature. You know, you have a computer in your skull that has certain parameters to operate. And when something goes out of whack, it's not your fault. It's your biological response to a trauma. And I think it creates a sense of understanding that's it's just pervasive, because once you know, you can never unknow. And I think if we get this message out to people, we take the mysteriousness out of suicidality, and then we give them exact parameters on how to get back in their bodies, ground themselves, and essentially the blood will flow back to those areas in their mind, and they'll suddenly become aware, oh, this too shall pass, and they'll have hope. And that's what I'm hoping to put out there in the next book that I'm writing right now. Before I hope to put that message out in very concrete terms for people.
That's a really powerful point. When people realize that it's actually something organic happening in the brain, like it's the shame, once that's dissipated, it's like you can actually then get to work, right? When you know that, how powerful that is. It's like a Navy SEAL friend, when all these things were happening, this depression, he was breaking down. But when he saw a scan of his brain, there were little black pinholes all over his brain. Like, this is a physical problem here. And then it's like, okay, logic set in, and it's okay, let's get to work. Let's heal this brain. So thank you. That's a powerful point. Scott.
I've forgotten everything I was going to ask. Yeah.
Oh no.
I couldn't help that, but anyhow, hey, Dan, I think I would imagine that part of your appeal to the folks that you worked with, the younger soldiers, was your maturity level. You know, you were coming in as an older officer, you know, not that second, first lieutenants aren't good folks. I mean, they're very smart, but they don't have a lot of experience in life that you probably brought firsthand to those folks. And that's something that's hard to capture. So I would imagine that made a difference because they were able to, they saw your maturity and they were able to come to you, and that's a big plus. The other thing I wanted to say is, I know for me, I spent 21 years in the Marine Corps, and it was from 2001, you know, when, well, I went in 92, but in 2001, you know, after the towers came down, everything just went at Mach pace, right? And we're in 2 wars over, you know, a couple years, and it's a 20-year war, and everyone is coming back, and then they're getting ready to deploy again. You know, you come back, retrain, deploy, and it's on auto. And a lot of people, I mean, it was tough, right? Because you're going through something that maybe you never thought you'd go through, even though you were in the military. Most folks probably thought, you know, well, I may or may not go to combat, but then weren't expecting to be doing it for, you know, 8, 10 times, going back and forth. So all that trauma builds up. But you also have people who are spending less time on bases and stations, right? They're living off base. And so the leadership isn't around during the evening hours. And so there's a lot of folks kind of left to their own devices. And, you know, not that you're babysitting folks, but if you have leadership on base that can be, you know, more engaged in what's happening when they're, you know, after hours, I think that's a problem. I think that is something that they need to talk about, because I think a lot of things happen after hours that might not happen if you had a little bit more oversight of folks during that time. But, you know, I also know that you harden up a lot because of the environment that you're in, and you know, you focus on what it is you're doing objective wise, and it's easy to not think about the fact that other folks may be feeling the same way that you're feeling, right? And so you put that off, and you don't want to come across as being weak, the weak sister, so to speak, right? So you suck it up, and then you're maybe even less willing to take that from someone else, right? Which sounds crazy. You doubt yourself, but then you want to hold folks to account too. So all that said, I don't know what's happening right now in the military in terms of what they're doing to get folks of the right frame of mind to be talking to their men and women about suicide and all the issues around it. When I was a battalion commander, I had a Marine commit suicide, and it was horrible. It's a whole nother story that I won't get into now. But fortunate or not for me and the people that I was working with, going through everything that happened, my brother-in-law committed suicide in '91, the year before I went into the Marine Corps, and that was very traumatic. And so having some experience, going through that with the family and all of the loss that comes with when that happens, at least I had some bit of a footing, right, from the experience in how to deal with some of the emotions and, who to speak to and how to speak to the folks, especially the parents. And so I just, again, I don't know what's happening right now in the military in terms of the programs that they have to bring leadership into, engaging their folks and important issues that need to be talked about for how they can better handle situations in advance. And then when it happens, how best to proceed. So, I mean, you may know more about that because you were a little sooner to my time retiring in 2012. But thank you for what you're doing.
One thing, if I could just say something real quick. Sorry, I didn't know you're a battalion commander, so sir. One thing that you said really impacted me.
Dan, I appreciate that. It's been Scott since 2012.
Yeah. So, so I was talking to Sara about this. I saw guys brief the soldiers, you don't talk about your depression. Don't tell me you're suicidal. You guys haven't seen what I've seen. You haven't been where I've been. You have no right basically to experience your human experience, which is extremely invalidating. And then, come to find out that NCO or, that officer would have, this was common, man. They'd have a psychiatric break. You'd find out later on, hey, did you hear so-and-so just got carted off to the hospital? And psychologically speaking, that totally makes sense because they're projecting and they're shutting others down because they're closing the aperture on their feelings. So they don't want to feel the highs. They don't want to feel the lows because they can't handle it, right? So, but they're teaching all these soldiers, because I suffer with this, you're all going to suffer with this. And I thought that was horrible because, as you guys put in the chat about generational trauma, that cycle ends with me. You know what I mean? Like the family stuff ends with me. I'm not going to pass that down. I've been abused. I'm not going to abuse someone else. I'm not going to make them feel that. And I would hope that leaders of any industry, especially the military, would say the buck stops with me. So what I hated seeing is that somebody would talk about eventually like, yeah, I'm suicidal, or I'm depressed, or I'm drunk every single night to go to bed. And then you find out like, hey man, you've been talking to the soldiers like they're idiots for months. You've been briefing them like they're criminals. You've been talking to them in such a way that this leader has lost all credibility in the soldiers' eyes, because the soldiers aren't stupid. And from a mental health perspective, I want both sides to thrive and to heal. I don't want that NCO or that officer, because I don't want them to suffer, and I certainly don't want them to make the soldiers feel like the soldiers deserve to suffer because they do. And so that's the hardest thing, is can we create a discussion in the active duty world where combat veterans, officers, NCOs meet with the new guys coming in and share wisdom to prevent this stuff. It's all about preventative maintenance before things get critical. So I just wanted to, let you know that really impacted me. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Dan. Listen, would you guys let me be okay with Tammy and then David going, and then we'll start the second round? Okay, Tammy, what's on your mind? You're muted. You're muted.
Okay, it's coming off. First of all, Dan, I want to tell you that I really, as a parent, as a mother of somebody, sorry, that lost her son due to suicide, and he was active duty. And he knew he had a problem. He went to his commander and to his NCOs, and they kind of just shoved him under the carpet. And I think it's really important that I've said it from the start, you know, we spend multiple hours, time, money training our combat veterans or all our soldiers to be what they have to be to do what they've got to do. But we also need to spend just as much time and effort in teaching them the other end and coming back into society and about suicide and depression and anger and all the other things that go along with what they have to do. The problem that I see, and you said it, is that they break them, they make them, they break them, and then they throw them away. And that's how I feel. There's so many things that can be helpful to our veterans and even to our active duty. I think martial arts, my son did martial arts also. He did it before he ever even joined the military. But I currently work for Soldier's Best Friend, and we train the veteran and the service dog together. And that's another avenue, you know, to help. But I think that we need to keep that communication going, and we need to continue to include our leaders, the military leaders, in that conversation. And those conversations need to start in basic training. They shouldn't start when they're already having a problem. They need to start in basic training, and they need to teach each other how to recognize what's going on and have a solution to that, you know, have something somewhere where they can go. And again, I appreciate all of you guys. I'm really nervous. I'm not good at talking. Holly kept telling me to raise my hand, so I did, but thank you. Thank you again.
Hey, Tammy, I know we just met, but I just finished a book on, it's a very stripped down version of terminology for mental health to give the troops some. It's geared towards men and it's geared towards service members. It's a little handbook. If you wouldn't mind, through Sara, let me know your son's name and his birth date and the day he passed. And I'd like to dedicate the book to him. So I was thinking today, I'm like, I don't know who to dedicate this to. And so all about creating language for mental health. So it'd be really cool if you'd let me do that.
I will, and I appreciate that. But before you do, there's a lot more to my son's story. So when I do, kind of do some research, and if you want to reach out to me before you dedicate the book to him, and that's awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you.
That make me cry here.
Me too.
Thank you for your courage, Tammy. I'm so glad that you shared. Thank you. And then David.
Hey guys, how are you? Sorry for the dark picture in the car on the way home from school. Dan, I'm also sorry that I missed the beginning of your talk, and I was excited to hear it, but we ended up getting out late. But I just wanted to answer a question that Scott had raised and that you had started to follow up with. So the Army, and I'm not a veteran, I'm a retired police officer, but I have some insight into the resiliency program the Army has taken from the University of Pennsylvania. And they're doing a great job with the resiliency program, both at the officer and NCO and enlisted levels. And they're really supporting the active duty folks and the reservists with the resiliency program. And that is going to continue to grow and be part of the basic training formula, as well as going through the years of service. I don't know any of the other branches that are currently picking it up. I know the Air Force was doing it for a while. I'm not sure if they still are. And on the law enforcement side, it's been a growing trend as well. So I'd love to talk to you offline about that. It sounds like you're doing some incredible work with the mental health piece of veterans and active duty folks. And I'm currently at the University of Pennsylvania for my master's degree in positive psychology with Dr. Seligman himself. So who is the absolute guru on all of this. So it's been an exciting opportunity, and I'd love to hear you out and understand exactly where you're going and maybe find a way to collaborate as I'm going through the program and beyond.
Yeah, you know what? I'll send this link and then connect all of you guys on this group. And then when I get the okay from Dan, if he gives me the green light for this, then I'll publish it. But I'll at least get you all connected on email. Okay. Thanks, David. Chappie.
Yeah. First off, I just sent a connection request on LinkedIn to Dan, and I noticed he was a third connection, which means that none of you people are connected with him on LinkedIn.
I couldn't find him. Yeah, Dan, I have to find you
You
on
have
LinkedIn.
to search the Dan Zia Joseph. You'll find him.
What is it? Dan Zia Joseph?
Yeah. And now everybody's typing.
I don't really check LinkedIn anymore, but y'all are gonna make me go back to it.
You're gonna get back on LinkedIn, bro. I wanted to talk a little bit about what Sara brought up about suicidal ideation and that time aspect of it. For me, my PTSI was all about my dad. And if anybody of you read the poem that I posted recently called Suck It Up, that explains a lot about my journey there. And that was a lot of what led to, those feelings of worthlessness, because as a firefighter, you lose count of the number of people that you've saved, but the people that you lose, and especially little kids, they stay with you. And for me, they came and visited me at night and asked me why it was why was it that you couldn't save me? And that brought on a real feeling of failure and worthlessness. And that went on for a long time. And it got to the point where I was so terrified of sleeping that I ended up, neck deep in a bag of methamphetamine and smoking weed. When it was finally time that I couldn't stay awake anymore, then it was smoking enough weed to just be an absolute zombie so that it could minimize that. And that went on for 10 years. And it finally got to a point where I didn't know what was wrong specifically. We're talking about, my service was in the 1980s. When Suck It Up was absolutely, that was the summary of every critical incident stress debriefing. And after 10 years of that, to me, it felt like I have a terminal illness. I'm going to die and nobody is going to miss me when I'm gone. So I'm going to go ahead and get it over with. And so you're right, Sara. It's a feeling like this isn't going to stop. This is terminal. And I might as well cut it short. And the only thing that kept me from, I've told people, a Colt Combat Commander has about 4.5 pounds of trigger. And I don't know if I used 3 or 3.5 pounds of that trigger up, but it was a vision of my 4 daughters and what would they do without my money, not without their dad, because he was worthless, he wasn't worth shit. But what would they do without the money I made? And so the decision was, well, I'm just going to wait until they're grown. And luckily for me, I got a buddy check after that happened, and that saved my life. But you're right, Sarah. It's about a complete loss of perspective on there could be an end to this. There was absolutely no end that I could see that didn't come with a 230 grain hollow point.
Yeah, that's great sharing. It's very intense. Well, I'm glad you're here, Chappie. I'm grateful that many people on these calls are still here, because there's been some very vulnerable times. Sarah Marie. Oh, you're muted.
There we go. So kind of circling back and piggybacking kind of on what Todd is talking about. I didn't know that's what he was going to talk about, but you know, when you mentioned your book, Dan, I would be remiss, one as a nurse, and then also as somebody that has someone in my life who has a traumatic brain injury and probable CTE, which is what the NFL, you know, it's more publicized with the NFL, but I think they're also finding that more and more domestic violence victims are also suffering from TBI and CTE because of the injuries to their brain. And so, you know, your paper on that decreased blood flow to those parts of the brain, a lot of those injuries, you know, cause that decreased blood flow and just continue to cause brain death. And a lot of that demographic you know, they experience that sense of timelessness because that portion of their brain is legitimately just dying and withering away. And so I would be remiss if I didn't kind of say something. I don't know where you're going with your book, but I wholeheartedly believe that there is hope for that demographic, and it's in finding the community and finding people that love and support them. And so I think sometimes stories that I've heard, those people still continue to feel hopeless because the treatments for PTSD and the trauma and stuff, it doesn't work because you can't reverse brain death. And so I think sometimes people don't explore those avenues and realize that there are other treatment options that can help. It's not a cure, but it can help. And so I felt the need to kind of say that just because of you know, who's in my life and how much you know, how many stories I've been hearing with others that are suffering with the same thing, the suicidal ideation. And every day it's a battle. I mean, there's some of the most amazing warriors that I know. I'm on a CTE Facebook group. And they are some of the most amazing warriors, you know, that I know, because they deal with suicidal ideation every single day and they battle it every single day, and it's not going to go away.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah Marie. Appreciate you sharing that. So I think this will be the last question. Janet.
Yeah, I just wanted to say my experience with others was 1973. The man who introduced my husband and I shot himself 3 days before our wedding at my mother-in-law's house. So that was my very first experience, and his funeral was the day of our wedding. But it took another 10 years for me to even understand what happened. And it took a young RCMP officer to sit with me after he had been to a murder-suicide involving a child. And he sat with me and he said to me, he says, Janet, I cannot rationalize this in my head. And 6 months later, and I talked to him like I was a dispatcher, I talked to him up right up, and I saw him at the Christmas party right up to like 3 weeks before he committed suicide. And he was that jovial person and stuff, and no signs. But in those days, they never even talked to, we didn't have, debriefings or anything. But those words that he said to me that he couldn't rationalize in my head after he'd done it, I look back at the history, what was going on in Henry's life as an older adult. I could look back and look at it and saw things there that made me understand that he had something going on that I'm sure he couldn't rationalize in his head. And so like Todd said, and like others have said, there's that irrational thing, but during that time, it's not irrational to them. It's just they can't see anything beyond that. And when we're not taught it, like there's so much out there that we can teach now, that we can share, we can say these traumas are going to happen to you and you're going to go through some shitty stuff. We have to learn tools that when that happens. And those should be taught, just like Tammy said, right? You need to teach them along with the other stuff. Yes, get them through that. Maybe get them through that basic training, then sit them down and say, now we're going to teach you how to debrief it, or how to understand it in your head. There's a journal, write it down, burn it up, whatever, but just to deal with it, because we know what's going to happen. We know they're going to go through these things. We do. Like nobody, when I was dispatching, nobody ever said, you guys are going to go through it. Dispatchers weren't even thought that they were going to go through this. You just sit behind a radio and answer the phone and tell the police where to go. That part I liked, but you know what I mean? So anyways.
Thank you, Janet. Yeah, that was a great way to end it.
Really, really quickly, given that it's Suicide Prevention Month, anybody who wants to be able to provide immediate critical help to somebody who is absolutely in crisis, look up ASSIST, ASIST, Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. It is absolutely amazing. It's a 2-day course, and it saves lives. I got my ASSIST training last year, and it is, besides the mental health first aid training, I think those are two of the most critical trainings that you can have for immediate critical intervention with somebody who is has a plan and a means and a place. That means they are in imminent danger of taking their own life. And ASSIST training is absolutely critical, and it's amazing. It's very good training. I would suggest anybody to take it.
That's good to hear. I know that they're doing in the SEAL community, active duty here in San Diego or Coronado. That's exactly what they do, is the ASSIST. So good to hear. Well, you guys, once again, I just thank you so much for your participation. And isn't it amazing what we learn on these groups, and that we're here every week to glean so much from other people's stories and what they've learned. So Dan, amazing night tonight. Thank you so much. I'm excited that you're out there being and making a difference. Is there anything you want us in particular to walk away with? Any last words for this evening?
Simply that you're part of the discussion, and that's awesome. I'm happy to be part of the discussion too with you. I didn't want to write this book as a know-it-all who has the answers. So thank you for just being like part of the organic process of getting this out there. And I believe in like sort of this group consciousness of, if we all are elevating ourselves in awareness, systemically, society, the units, the military, everyone's going to benefit. So I just want to simply show gratitude that you would give me a voice, and vicariously through me, hopefully the soldiers that I got to serve with will have a voice as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think we all appreciate that so much. I just want to make sure, Denise, were you trying to raise your hand? I just don't want to cut you off right now.
No, I'm fine. I'm just muddling through and I appreciate everybody and I'm just listening. I did send, because people were talking about the CTE. So I was at the Navy SEAL conference a few years back and we looked into that. But also too, there's some other modalities happening in that arena. So I'm going to send some information out and anybody that wants to reach in, I'll give them more information. Okay, so yeah.
Fantastic. And again, Dan, how can people reach you? Thank you. Thank you, Denise.
Yeah. Feel free. I mean, I'm more than happy to have you give my contact info out if you'd like, Sarah. And then through my website, combatpsych.com, there's a contact me button and y'all can, preview the book and listen to other podcasts I've been on and kind of get a sample for how I speak. And feel free to disseminate that to whoever you want. Send them to the site. I'm hoping if I curate all the talks that I'm giving and being a part of, it can just be a point of resource to people. And I really don't know how big this is going to build, but it seems pretty exciting. And so I'll upload everything to Combat Psych and try to build out a thesis, an ongoing thesis on new books and new material, maybe some workbooks, just to try to get some wisdom out there and grow myself in the process too, and my awareness as well. So thanks.
Wonderful. You're a great voice. Thank you.